Board members, staff, guests, and members of the public are reminded that the full authority board committee meeting is being recorded, as we were just talking about, and will be posted to the authority website along with the official written minutes. As such, comments and opinions expressed may be published, and any comments expressed by individual board members, guests, and the general public are their own and do not represent the opinions or comments of the full authority and/or the KCCA Board of Directors. The recorded video of the full authority meeting is not considered the official record of that meeting. The official record of the full authority meeting shall consist solely of the minutes provided by the full authority. So, welcome everyone. Any declarations of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, I do have a property matter to add to our closed session. Okay, so we get that on the bottom of the list. Anybody else have anything they want to add? Okay, so let's go on with our, we have no hearings today. So let's go on to the minutes of the meetings, October the 16th. The full authority meeting, and November the 7th, full authority meeting. You've seen, you've had a chance to review those. Do I have a motion? Linda?
I'll move.
Move. Ralph, second. For both motions?
Sure.
Okay. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. So that's for economy's sake.
Okay.
2 votes. 2-1. Matters arising. November media report.
Mr. Chair, the media report was in the advance package. Just a couple of things to highlight. We had staff attended an emergency response planning session with Central Elgin Fire Rescue and the municipality of Central Elgin. And the disaster that we had a tabletop exercise on was flood in North Stanley. So we worked through that last week. The water at the dog park has been turned off, so people can still enjoy it, they just can't get a drink. And I'll turn it over to project tracking and Betsy, if that's okay, Mr. Chair.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just put this slide in to highlight a couple of wetland projects. The Port Stanley Sewage Lagoons is a neat project. 2 of the cells of that sewage lagoon system have been decommissioned as part of their new treatment plant. And along with partners, Elgin Stewardship Council, Ducks Unlimited, St. Thomas Field Naturalists, we've basically recontoured those 2 lagoons into wetlands. So it's a really important birding spot. So this will just enhance the features that are there. And just, we've been out, lots of interest still in wetland creation projects. So those are just pictures of 4 sites that will be going ahead in 2020.
Excellent. Okay.
And just one quick question.
Yep.
Are those all on private land, the 4 sites?
The 4 sites there, yes, are all in private land.
Excellent. Yes, sorry. Grant.
And I know the residents of South Open area are very happy that there's going to be a reduced smell.
Okay, with that in mind.
Hey, Central Elgin bought the property in South Open, got their sewage.
Sounds like Toronto. Okay.
Sounds like we should up the taxes.
The November watershed conditions. Do we need a motion for the project
And we have
tracking?
the motion for the media report and the project tracking.
Okay, Allison and Elizabeth. All in favor? Carried. Okay, watershed conditions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Reasonably quiet month on the front. We did update our watershed conditions statement for the Lake Erie shoreline on November 1st. Fortunately, the water levels are continuing their decline, which is nice to see. The black line is for 2019, and the red line on that graph is 2018, so you can see we're approaching 2018 levels, which is nice. The watershed isn't really in any danger danger at the moment for a flood event in the water courses and no low water.
Excellent. Any questions at all about that, folks? It's interesting to see the average line there
Mhm.
and go, holy cow.
Yes.
Yeah, it's quite shocking. I mean, people don't
I don't think
tend to
people
think of
realize
it that way,
No.
yeah. The gray line is 2017, so you can see the,
So has the crystal ball arrived yet or not?
no, I'm still waiting for that from Amazon.
Okay, thank you. Linda?
We've heard quite a bit, and I know they've had it on TV a number of times through the news around the shoreline erosion and how much it's really escalated, I guess, this year alone. Are we tracking that, or is anybody tracking that? And if so, how would we be going about that?
I think Joe might have an
Through you,
answer to
Mr.
that.
Chair, I can answer that question. Typically, in our watershed along Lake Erie, because of the significant erosion rates that we have, we rely solely on aerophotography because we can depict that fairly easily because of the amount that it's going. So aside from just regular visits and understanding what's happening, that's the extent of our monitoring right now. Would be waiting for that next Google Earth imagery, or we're flying the swoop this spring or in 2020. So that'll update us on where the current erosion rates are happening right now.
Because we have a number of concerned, if I may, because we have a number of concerned citizens watching the shoreline quite closely, those areas that which the erosion is happening a little more faster, well, it's happening faster than other areas, and certainly along, I was trying to think of those Port Burwell, Bruce, and sorry, forgive me, but I know they're having some struggles even with redoing their dredging and those kinds of things. Do we have anything to add to that, Joe, or is there anything that we need to be concerned about as far as what they're doing out there?
In terms of Port Bruce or Port Burwell, that's in the Catfish, so I'm not too familiar with what's happening in those ports, but I know historically the nature of shoreline erosion that happens on our high bluffs are large superficial landslides. So once that toe gets undermined, we can see up to 10 meters slide down into the lake, and then it creates kind of a base of soil at the toe of the lake that takes some time for that to erode again before it starts that cycle over again. So we are certainly in a higher than average active erosion system right now. How that impacts to the long-term erosion rates will depend how it moves forward at that rate. But certainly we are in a transition time right now where we're seeing those active slump failures occurring quite often. But in terms of the impacts and things that are happening in those other port communities, I'm not up to speed or have enough information to answer.
So nothing to worry about right now along that shoreline. I know we have a couple of houses that are hanging precariously close,
Right,
very close
right.
to the edges, so
We're certainly
we
monitoring.
don't have to have evacuation orders or anything like that at this point.
Well, that's being considered through the municipality. So with those two instances, if the houses are inhabitable, that's under the building code. The chief building officials ordered unsafe removal of those, and it's the municipality negotiating with the landowners in terms of removal or rebuild. So our involvement would be if the landowners are proposing to rebuild in that area. So in terms of evacuation, emergency response, it's the municipality that's going through that process.
Okay, well, that clears that up. Thank you very much.
Ralph?
Just, isn't it down in Wheatley where they have lost part of a roadway and so on in the park?
Right.
Which is just a tremendous, when you look at it and say, how can that all happen within a year or two?
Yeah. One interesting fact, if I may, Mr. Chair, through you, is as we're seeing a lot of those flooding impacts in those other areas along the shoreline, is considering that average lake level, the 100-year static lake level where the lake level is now, those communities have development buildings and structures that are below that elevation. So without any precipitation, wind, or wave action, they're having impacts by flooding, just simply on the elevation of the water. When we look in Port Stanley, all of our developments, our buildings and structures are above that elevation. So our concern more is that wave action pushing the waves up over the crest. So we're in a little different scenario than what those communities are, mainly because of the elevation of where our community and our buildings and structures are built at.
Awesome.
Just sort of relative to it, you mentioned once, Elizabeth, about a study that was done, was it Port Glasgow just recently? Then there was going to be information released about the erosion rates. Do you have any more information about that?
Again, sure, if I could through you. So it's a study that's being led by, I think, the federal government with Arcan, partnered with Chatham-Kent, Lower Thames Conservation Authority. It's a climate change study specifically looking at the shoreline. We do have some limited information that's been shared with us that we participated in a roundtable discussion with different municipalities and things like that. I'm just not sure if the next public meeting has happened yet in that area. But if that's an interest of the board, once that's available, we can certainly bring it back at a subsequent report. I think one of the known issues there is looking at how much Lake Erie is freezing. So historically, they've seen high percentages of the lake freezing over, I think at 90%, where more recently we're seeing less and less coverage of the lake freezing over. So what that does is it creates more wave action and energy happening over the winter months that we haven't typically seen in the past. So that's one of the concerns that they're looking at, is the less coverage of freeze on Lake Erie would see increased erosion rates happening because of that effect.
It'll be interesting to see when it comes up.
Joe, quick question. So every time we have a failure along the shoreline, how often do the landowners inform us that this has happened? Does it ever happen? Or we just find it haphazardly in our yearly kind of?
Yeah, very little, unless it affects a building or it affects a landowner wanting to remediate or build. But for the most part, our knowledge is mostly picked up through aerial imagery.
Right.
I know cell phones, they aren't going to let you know when the house usually is getting close to the front. We have staff, building inspector, road supervisor goes up on one specific road that we have an issue with, and just has a look-see every once in a while, just after a big storm, just to see if they need to address the situation.
Like
Generally, they aren't forthcoming.
Well, I can understand why, right? But on the other hand, you know, maybe there's some help out there that I don't know about, that if I don't ask, I'm not gonna get, right? Ralph, did you have a question? No, Linda, you had a question.
Yeah, I just had a further question through you to Joe. The water sewage treatment plant is continuing to go further and further out the lake. Not really, but it does look that way.
As the shoreline cuts in.
Yeah, as it cuts in, and it's
Yeah.
really cutting in quite a bit. I noticed the last time I was down, and even more so this year with the higher rate,
Right.
higher water levels. Do we, or are we responsible for anything down there at all? I know they have their own set of rules and bylaws, that kind of stuff. But are we responsible for anything at all down there? The big turret that's way out in the lake now is getting to be quite a distance out there.
Yeah, they would be held to the same regulatory requirements where they would have to apply to this authority to do any repair works. But that is a good example where we can see the little cell movements, where if we look west of that structure, there's beach forming, there's not a lot of erosion. But on the downdrift side, to the east of it, we're seeing that cutting in.
The real
And
cutting
in my time with the authority, they have had to extend their shoreline protection structure there. And I agree, looking at the aerial photography, it looks like they may be in that realm again of having to plan continued protection to uphold that structure.
Okay, so
But we haven't had any recent.
they would have to apply to us and look at that.
Yeah, they'd have to go through all the same approval processes as
Okay.
anybody else.
All right, thank you.
Okay, any other questions at all? Okay, so I need a motion to accept the watershed conditions report. Elizabeth and Grant, all in favor? Thank you, carried. Okey dokey. Meeting dates. The gremlins.
I know I can't get my
Shooting me with that?
Just changed it.
Your glasses changed.
Yeah, I mean, maybe you can look at the batteries. I think I'm,
No, mine's not coming up at all either, Elizabeth. It's having a hard time today.
Joe?
The February, sorry, the January 22nd meeting, and that's our elections meeting, is the last day of Roma,
Oh,
and many of us will be away.
We designed that.
I,
Yeah.
We gotta leave early?
My apologies, I thought I had built the dates around, at least some of the conferences that I knew about, but
We
that
haven't
must
got all the
be.
way through the year yet.
Where's Roma this year?
Toronto. The center of the universe, of course, where we would hold.
Where you would be
rural
anyway,
municipalities.
I go to Toronto every week just
There it is.
because.
So the reason why I had picked January 22nd is because of the way the year end falls. We were
Right.
having problems looking at getting the audit
Right.
done and year end done and back to you guys by the 15th. So we had proposed to move it to the 22nd to make accommodations for Kathleen's sanity and the auditor's capabilities. So if that's the last day of Roma,
Yes.
we could look at possibly doing it on the 23rd, if that works for other people's
Sure.
Good,
schedules.
I don't have a problem moving it to the 23rd.
And that would still work for accounting, Kathleen, just moving it the extra day.
Sorry, what date were taking out then? So
January 22nd would move to January 23rd. And if that's okay with everybody, I can update that schedule and recirculate it out later today.
I have another question. August is always a challenge because of payroll.
Right.
We don't have a meeting in July, but we have one in August. Is there a reason why we couldn't put the August meeting in July? Is that just because staff all go on holiday during July? Is that the?
Yeah, so.
I'm not blaming you guys, but
So typically, we had continued to meet in July, probably about 2 or 3 years ago. I think it was Bill Mackey who suggested eliminating the July meeting to accommodate staff vacation as well as board vacation.
Right.
In this agenda this year, we didn't meet in July or August because of conferences, conflicts in August. So on this schedule, I did asterisk August as saying just if required. So as we get closer to that date, then we might feel more comfortable saying it's fine not meeting in August.
if you
as
remember
well.
this year, we got ourselves,
And
September
this year,
was,
September was
decades
a
of
pretty, was a pretty full month.
so I'm just, alternative, anyways, it's, doesn't matter, but I just, I had highlighted it because I thought, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions about those meeting dates? Nobody? Okay. Do we want to have a motion then to accept those as law?
I'll move them as amended.
Okay, Linda, secondary. Joe? Any other comments at all, folks? Elizabeth, those all work for you?
Yeah, I was just looking at the AMO conference, it's August 16th to 19th, and we're scheduled for the 19th, just to help them meet us.
And is it in Ottawa again this year? Emma? And then next year it's in London, right? Yeah. Okay, so we have a motion on the floor, all in favor? Carried. Thank you. OPG tree planting post-season report. It's good. Highlighting
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This was just circulated for information, a report we sent into OPG as part of our current 3-year contract. So this year, the funding that we had was to plant 20,000 seedlings in our watershed, in the Upper Thames watershed. So we met that goal for over 27 acres of land restored.
Well done.
Good. Indeed. Okay, want a motion to accept that report? Ralph and Elizabeth, all in favor? Thank you, carried. Okay.
And in the minutes, could we put down our thanks to the staff for that, please?
Yes.
So that's recorded in the minutes.
Number of correspondence items there, folks. Anything in particular you want to address, converse about? The biennial tour, I know it was mentioned at our last Conservation Ontario meeting. Looked really fun.
Like watching our minutes.
The same thing. Okay, seeing none, we'll accept the motion for accepting correspondence. Allison? Seconder? Elizabeth, all in favor? Thank you. Okay, so our next step, statement of revenue and expenses.
No statement of revenue or expenses this month, next month.
Okay, so the next new business, page 36, Ontario Low Water Response Program.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, we briefly discussed this as part of the budget meeting. The Ministry of Natural Resources confirmed by email the loss of the $4,000 of funding. In that email, that was in your advance package. You also see that if we would like to, we could continue to coordinate the water response team and coordinate confirming local conditions for the ministry. It's staff recommendation that we don't do that, that without the funding, that is extra work that the ministry is asking us to do. And so my recommendation is that until the funding is restored, that we cease coordinating that local response team and confirming local conditions. There's minimum local impact. Low water restrictions were voluntary as part of this program. They were voluntary up until we declared a level 3. And Jen, correct me if I'm wrong, we never did declare level 3 in our area. And even then, local water restrictions did very little to bolster creek levels because most of our residents draw water from the lake anyways. So the recommendation is before you that staff cease to participate in that program until funding is provided.
Move the motion.
Second, okay, so Linda moved it, Grant seconded it. Any other comments at all? I have a brief question. Will this be communicated to them, why we're not doing it anymore?
Yes, we can do that.
So they know it's because they're not paying for it? Awesome. Good. All in favor? Carried. Okay, photographic and video monitoring and surveillance policy.
Mr. Chair, this policy is basically put before you as a matter of getting our ducks in a row in order to introduce cameras to look at flood forecasting and surface water at key areas throughout the watershed. We need to, the policy proposed meets the requirements set out by the Information and Privacy Commissioner and certainly balances the need to collect information with the public's right to privacy. All the areas where cameras would be installed, and right now we're just proposing cameras at Dale Dam and the Belmont area, which are 2 of our flood damage centers. Those areas would be clearly signed that there's video surveillance occurring and reasons why, as reported in the policy. We would ensure reasonable measures to ensure the security of the photographic and video monitoring. Access to the records would be limited to authorized personnel. And video surveillance would be limited for the certain uses outlined in the policy, including protection security of visitors, undertaking research, monitoring surface water flow through watershed conditions. And again, I would just state that the only purpose that staff has outlined for cameras currently, or budget for it, are monitoring surface water flows at those 2 locations. We do have a couple of trail cams that we do put up for flora and fauna. The capture and collect, review and analysis of those records, we'd have 30 days to capture and collect the records, 9 months to review and analyze the records, and 30 days to dispose of any records and or pass any records to KCCA staff or designated provincial offenses officers. But it should be noted the retention periods will depend on the information collected, and that's outlined in the policy. And that records that contain no personal information, so we're simply bunnies and rabbits and deer, and or our pictures of flooding, ice jams, and those things, have no personal information would be kept indefinitely for scientific research and flood forecasting and monitoring purposes. I did have the policy reviewed by our legal counsel, and he provided his blessing.
Okay.
The policy as well was also based on a policy from Credit Valley Conservation Authority, which went through the same vetting as well.
Okay.
So it'd be my recommendation that we adopt the policy and that staff take the necessary steps to enact it.
Okay, any questions at all? Ralph?
No, I was just gonna second it if you want.
Okay, we have a motion ahead of us to photographic and video monitoring and surveillance policy be adopted, and further, that staff take all necessary steps to enact the policy. We have a mover, Grant, seconder, Ralph. Any comments, concerns? Oh, you guys are quiet. All in favor? Carried. Maybe it's up for business today. And our draft shared services letter.
Mr. Chair, this is direction to staff based on a motion that was tabled at the last meeting, that staff be directed to prepare a letter requesting that Catfish and member municipalities consider the benefits of shared services. I did attach the draft letter to the package, and I'm open for discussions, comments, changes, revisions that you would like. I think one of the parts of the motions was who we would consider circulating that letter to, and I think you'll see in the draft that I was proposing to circulate, send it to Catfish, but circulate both to KCCA's member municipalities, Catfish's member municipalities, and the Honorable Jeff York. That's right.
You all had a chance to read it. Any comments?
Is there any possibility you could read it, Elizabeth? I can't bring it up, so.
Sure. KCCA has released a draft 2020-2023 budget to its member municipalities that incorporates a 3% annual increase to municipal levy. The proposed increase does not represent any increase in service or programs. Rather, the budget protects against a reduction of services and ensures that the authority continues to protect life and property from natural hazards through integrated watershed management. In a recent budget discussion, board members recognized that KCCA is not the only conservation authority struggling with these difficult budget decisions. In fact, cost avoidances have been realized in the past because of closer working relationships between our two organizations. Over the past 5 years, KCCA has provided GIS services and bolstered stewardship funding by cooperatively working on initiatives such as COA, Glassy, and the Elgin Clean Water Program. As Catfish Creek Conservation Authority reviews its current programs and services, staffing levels and resources, KCCA's Board of Directors respectfully asks that the consideration of shared services between our organizations be placed in the forefront. In 2010, KCCA undertook an efficiency study that identified programs and services that have the potential for cost savings by sharing services. These included centralized marketing and website design and administration, joint purchasing and negotiating major capital expenses, expanding external outreach and education by sharing programs already developed, integration of staff, cross-marketing of campgrounds and recreational opportunities. CCA's Board of Directors has always maintained its wish to protect its local autonomy. It is hoped that our two organizations can find a way forward in a period of austerity that continues to value local autonomy without ignoring opportunities for cost containment strategies. To this end, KCCA's Board of Directors would ask that CCCA consider naming 2 board members that could meet with 2 board members of KCCA and senior management from both organizations to begin to identify programs, services, or staff that could be shared for cost containment. Sincerely, Stephen Harvey.
Thank you.
Okay. Allison?
I just have a question, and I know not everybody's here today, so it would be a question that we answered later. Knowing that some of our members have fellow council members that are on the Catfish Creek board, is there any informal conversation going between seeing what the temperature is like for this at the moment? Casually? And does it seem receptive or never over my dead body, or, you know, I just wanted to get a feel for what it's like. And I don't really know what the politics are like down here, that's why I'm asking. I just noticed that when I look at who's on the boards, that you have fellow members, and I just was curious.
Generally, I can speak for for me only, conversations with my council member that's on Catfish Creek, very amicable to thinking about talking and working together. I asked his interpretation of the rest, and I don't have the same moral.
Mixed.
Would that be, right? It's a personality piece more than it is a board versus board.
Exactly,
Would that be?
exactly.
Sorry, were you finished, John?
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, through you to staff, just wondering why we're discussing only Catfish Creek and not Upper Thames, because certainly London, we also have representatives from London on Upper Thames. Just why we're looking to one and not to others to partner.
Grant, do you want to?
I can start, saying on Lower Thames, which is roughly the same size as Upper Thames, you can get to a point where it's too big, and the travel distances for staff is difficult. I know with Lower Thames, that's a long watershed, that our staff are really stretched to the limit as far as trying to cover the whole area. I think area becomes a big problem with wasted time traveling to different, especially with the day-to-day operations of the various management areas. I think this is a reasonable solution for now. Maybe Long Point works into the solution at some point, but you can get too big to the point where staff is you're adding staff just because of travel.
What's the mileage, top to bottom, for Kettle Creek right
Question, the whole watershed's 520 square kilometers.
It's about 20 minutes drive.
now? 20 minutes drive, okay, so that's
Distance.
probably 45 kilometers, okay?
So, Mr. Chair, I wasn't finished.
Yeah, sorry, oh, sorry.
I think I was looking to more of joint purchasing and negotiating capital expense, so that it's not even the staff time. I'm looking for, it's sort of an opportunity for shared marketing, web design, just economy of scale. Also wondering about our vehicle purchases and leases. I know the City of London, the city helps coordinate some, one for a board being the urban animal care in addition to Tourism London, that there's some economies of scale there that if we want to look into it, I'd be happy to bring that conversation back to the board decided that if there's an opportunity when we move forward.
Okay.
Obviously, what our members colleagues can do with leverage when we open things up.
Okay, Linda?
So I like that idea. I like the idea that we're looking at different opportunities and possibilities. This is talking about a complete connection between two authorities, whereas what you're talking about is sharing some of the services and purchasing and that kind of thing. So we are talking about two different things. It may be advantageous for us to also present a letter that says to those other authorities that are neighboring us, are there possibilities for us to do some of that shared purchasing and doing things in bulk? There's no reason we can't ask the question and then have staff, coordinate whether or not it's actually a feasible thing to do. But I do like the idea, why not ask? If we're going to probably have the ministry ask us to do this anyway, we might just well get ahead of the game. It's happened with many other types of facilities, whether it's school boards or whatever. So I would like to see us have a letter that would invite and perhaps ask to explore the idea of shared services.
So an initiation of the discussion on, hey, if you're buying pickups and we're buying pickups, maybe we can buy our pickups together.
Yeah, so, and other shared services.
I think the idea of having shared service agreements between conservation areas, it may be a great way to start with maybe people that weren't eager to join forces before. By starting out with a little bit, maybe opens up the conversation and becomes a good starting point for this kind of thing, because it sounds like there's two different, very strong ideas about the different conservation authorities, which maybe are entrenched and maybe a nice way to get into that.
I know you guys share services with the county, right?
Yeah, we do not share services.
Joe?
I agree 100% with Allison, but I also feel asking doesn't hurt anything. We share this same letter with other neighboring, I agree with Grant's point, that some of it's just gonna be too big if that's the case. Well, then that would come out in the discussions between boards as to, well, that can't be done, we really can't use the same rock officer between all of the places. But we can buy, okay, whatever the shared service might not work, but let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater as to what might work, or even just good communication. So I really do not mind sharing even exactly the same type of letter with other neighboring conservation authorities, just to ask for open communication. Let's see if there's stuff that we all do together, whether it's pickup trucks or weed eaters or whatever it might be. It makes sense.
Any other comments at all? Tony?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to clarify what Linda said about complete connection, because my interpretation of this letter is strictly shared services.
Yes.
But I was hearing that this one was different than perhaps a shared services.
So let me clarify. Because in the past, we have talked about the two becoming one, and I just know any letter that's going to be sent out is going to be seen that way. I know, without using a name, but a particular lady who will see this as almost like an invasion. But that's back to Joe's point about old history. It has nothing to do with board to board. This has more to do with personality. So I can see that letter being taken that way, that, you know, we're trying to get there. The wording, I think, is fine. Elizabeth, I think you did a great job on the letter, so I'm fine for it to go the way it is. I'm just saying it's not going to surprise me to have that interpretation come back. So does that help clarify? I'm back to Joe's point about that personality versus board to board.
Yeah.
If I may, Mr. Chair, so we can't control how it's received.
Right.
But I thought you were saying that our intent was complete connection. So if our intent is.
No, I'm sorry,
strictly
if you interpret it that way. I was referring to Joe's comment about personality.
So this is an invitation to sit down and talk about it.
About shared services.
Right.
Period.
Come on over for coffee.
Yeah.
We've got a big enough border.
With that in mind,
This is later.
let's move to a motion then. Do we want to send this letter at this point, or what?
Mr. Chair, just so I know what the direction to staff is, because I heard a lot of ideas. If the motion is to accept this letter, certainly send this letter out. And I think if we can at least get Catfish and Kettle in the room together, then those broader shared services with the other CAs might come out of that,
So
rather
this is the
than
primary?
making, this is the
Yes.
primary, and
Yes.
we can build from that, rather than making
Well,
a bigger
Some-
discussion before we.
if we take a good idea and spread it out too much, then maybe then everybody will want to do it, and then who knows?
Oh no, everybody doing a good idea.
Okay, so this is simply to share it with Catfish, okay?
At this point.
At this point in time, and then subsequently, hopefully, it's such a good thing that everybody else wants to take part, go to the big dance. Okay, we have a motion to Joe, thank you, Elizabeth, thank you. All in favor? Thanks very much. So we anticipate the positive reaction of our neighbors. Perfect. November planning and regulations activity.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So our typical stats since the last meeting were sent out. There was one application of interest that I attached to the letter, just because it wasn't just a simple approval. But just as a little bit of background for this property in Port Stanley at 226 Colburn Street, you can see the western half of the property is within the floodplain of Kettle Creek. In Port Stanley, we apply a two-zone concept, so the floodplain is divided into floodway, flood fringe. So this would be the flood fringe area where development is being proposed. This specific zoning bylaw amendment is proposing to change the existing land use in order to facilitate a medical clinic with residential units above. In order to meet the zoning requirements for parking, they are proposing a building up front, but converting the rest of the property in the rear into a parking lot. In order to do that, they have to make a floodplain alteration, raise that land. There's about 1 meter to 1.5 meter grade difference between the front of the property and the back. So it is a filling of the floodplain. We're just simply saying, if the land use decision is dependent on that parking area, there's further information we need to know to make sure that by losing that floodplain storage, we're not having an impact on other landowners or things like that. So we've simply advised the municipality that in our opinion, it's premature to make that decision until there's been an impact assessment evaluating the loss of floodplain storage. So,
No, I was just gonna say that, sounds like let somebody else do the rest of their work before we have to.
Okay, anything else with that at all, Joe?
no, so the recommendation is just to receive the report.
Okay, so we have a motion. Elizabeth and Ralph, all in favor? Thank you. Perfect. We are now at our closed session. So I have a motion
Motion move into
to move into close. Linda and Elizabeth, all in favor? Thank you. Okay. We need to give direction. Motion for,
Can we just go, sorry, Mr. Chair, can we just go down the list?
oh, sorry,
Right.
okay, yep. I lost my list here.
Sorry.
So for the minutes, I'll move those for
Okay,
September 4th.
yep. Minutes of meetings are moved, seconded by Elizabeth, all in favor? Thank you.
I'll move the October 2nd minutes as well.
Okay, thank you. And Allison? George?
I'll answer anything.
All in favor? Thank you. It's terrible. Those people.
I know.
I know.
Someone do the next one.
Okay, so then, motion for staff to take direction on the various motions and matters that we discussed. Elizabeth moves that. Grant seconds it. All in favor? Thank you very much.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, if I can have the one motion that would recognize that Grant Inglis will be our legal representation.
Oh, right, okay, yes. Moved by Elizabeth, second by Allison. All in favor? Thank you very much. I thought we were doing that next meeting.
I wanted Grant,
Oh,
the
okay.
other.
So we did specifically his name?
Yes,
Okay.
The service
As opposed to,
agreement.
as opposed to the.
yeah.
Okay, great, excellent. Next meeting is December the 18th.
Yes, and lunch will be provided for board members. It's traditionally kind of our Christmas thing, if you haven't had enough turkey at that point. So if you could RSVP to Jessica by December 13th, and she can make sure.
Because she's
Right,
catching the
members.
turkey. Is that line? We stand adjourned. Thank you very much. We need a motion to adjourn.